Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we're going to dive into a really fascinating argument, a logical case against the whole idea of interest. We're going to unpack all the common reasons people give for it, and then see how this particular source systematically breaks each one of them down.
It all kicks off with a question that, let's be honest, we've all probably asked ourselves. It's just so baked into our economy, it feels completely normal. But why? Why exactly do we pay a fee just to use money for a little while? Well, the answer usually stands on four key pillars. So typically, the whole system is propped up by these four main ideas: that interest is a reward for the lender's sacrifice, a premium they get for taking a risk, a kind of wage for the money itself, and a price for our preference for having things now. Let's see how our source takes on each of these.
All right, let's kick things off with the first two arguments because they're often talked about together. These are the ideas that interest is a fair reward for a lender's sacrifice, and, of course, a necessary insurance policy against risk. Okay, so the first argument is one you've probably heard, and it makes a lot of sense on the surface, right? The person lending the money could have spent it, maybe on a vacation or a new car. By giving it to you, they're sacrificing that immediate enjoyment and have to wait to get it back. So interest is basically their fair pay for that sacrifice. But here's the pushback. First off, are people really lending out their grocery money? Not really. They're lending their surplus cash, money they don't immediately need. So is that a true sacrifice? And more importantly, if waiting is the service being provided, why is the reward guaranteed? Think about it. A business partner also has to wait for a return on their investment. But if the business fails, they get nothing. The source asks a great question. Why should the person providing the money be any different? Okay, so what about risk? This is a huge one, probably the justification we hear the most. The argument is simple. The borrower might just not pay the money back. So from this point of view, interest is kind of like an insurance premium that the lender collects to protect themselves from that potential loss. But this is where the source really pokes a hole in that argument. If interest is really about risk, then why is it charged on loans that are fully secured with collateral? Like a mortgage, where if you don't pay, they take the house. The risk of loss there is basically zero. Plus, a real insurance premium is a fixed fee. Interest, on the other hand, keeps growing over time, even if the risk stays exactly the same. The argument here is that someone who truly shares risk would be a partner, sharing in the ups and downs, not a creditor who demands a fixed payment no matter what. And this question just puts a fine point on the whole critique, doesn't it? The common practice of charging interest on loans that are fully backed by collateral seems to fly in the face of the idea that interest is mainly a payment for taking a risk. All right, moving on to the next big pillar. This is a powerful one, the idea that money itself is a productive force, something that works and therefore deserves to get paid. The analogy here is really strong. If you rent a factory or a bulldozer to get a job done, you expect to pay rent for it. The argument is that money, or capital, is exactly the same. It's a tool that helps create more wealth, so it's earned a wage for its contribution, and we call that wage interest. But the refutation here gets down to a really crucial difference, the difference between potential and actual productivity. See, money has the potential to create wealth, sure, but it can't do it alone. It needs labor, it needs ideas, it needs enterprise. You get a wage for work that is actually done. But interest is demanded even if the business you invested in completely fails, and that capital produces absolutely nothing. From this perspective, the fair claim isn't a fixed wage on potential, but a share of the actual profit that's created. And that brings us to the final major justification we're going to look at. This one shifts gears a bit, moving away from pure economics and diving into human psychology. This one's all about something called time preference. The basic idea is that we, as humans, are just wired to want things now rather than later. $100 in your hand today feels way better than the promise of $100 a year from now. So interest is simply the price a borrower pays to get what they want now and satisfy that immediate desire. But does this hold up? The refutation argues that, well, no, this isn't some universal law. People save for retirement and their kids' college funds all the time, clearly valuing the future. But more importantly, this view kind of ignores the grim reality of why most people borrow. It's usually not because they're just impatient, it's often out of pure necessity, to cover rent, a medical bill, to put food on the table. And in that context, charging someone for their time preference starts to look a lot like exploiting their desperation. So, okay, after picking apart these main pillars, the source throws a bit of a curveball. It says, hey, even if we set all those arguments aside, can we at least agree that there's such a thing as a
reasonable interest rate as opposed to a crazy excessive one?
Well, as you can see, that word reasonable gets pretty slippery pretty fast. A mortgage rate of 4 or 5% might feel acceptable to a lot of us. But what about a credit card rate of 21% or a payday loan that's charging 400%? The source argues there's no real moral or scientific line here. These rates are just set by the market, and they can absolutely crush people. And this is where the author really draws a line in the sand. They come to a very stark moral conclusion. The rate itself doesn't change the basic principle. From this point of view, a small theft is still theft. Whether the rate is 2% or 200%, the fundamental act of taking a guaranteed, risk-free profit from someone else's need or hard work is, in their view, exactly the same. So, where does all this leave us? If the justifications are full of holes and the idea of a reasonable rate is just an illusion, what's the alternative? Well, the source puts forward a pretty bold conclusion. An economy without interest isn't just possible, it would actually be better. The perspective here is that interest is not the essential fuel for the economy we all think it is. People would still save money for their own security. Banks could work more like partners, sharing in both the profits and the losses of the businesses they fund. In fact, the source goes further, arguing that the system of interest is actually harmful. It concentrates wealth at the very top, creates these destructive boom and bust cycles, and ultimately holds back the real purchasing power of everyday people. And this final quote just wraps it all up perfectly. The core argument is that rather than powering economic activity, interest actually holds it back, creating a system built on debt that acts like a shackle on real, widespread prosperity. And so we're left with this really big, provocative question that challenges the foundation of our entire financial system. What would our world look like if our economies were built not on the rigid demands of debt, but on the shared risk and shared reward of true partnership? It's definitely something to think about.